Over the years, the advertising of alcohol has morphed and changed. The controversial nature of the product inherently has made it an interesting one to examine in advertising, as its nature has resulted in temporary bans on television advertising and major changes in how companies present their alcohol. Many advertisements now include the message, "Drink responsibly." Alcohol sales between 1971 and 2011 have been analyzed, and it was found that during the 40-year time frame, per capita consumption remained relatively unchanged. However, in that time period, studies report alcohol advertising in the U.S. increased more than 400%. The current shift is less focused on increasing sales market-wide, while that's always an underlying factor, but rather on increasing consumer choice. But first, it is important to understand alcohol advertising's origins, changes, and then take a look at the current climate. Alcohol advertising can date back all the way to 50 AD, where there are engravings of wine in places such as Pompeii. Through medieval times, you could begin to see it in print and in flyers, eventually in the newspapers. In the 1800s, alcohol could be heavily advertised in print without information such as ABV or price, health conditions, or drink responsibly, more simply that it was for the consumer's consumption. Alcohol also existed in many medicines, but without the declaration of such in their advertising. At the turn of the 20th century, there was a sweet spot for beer advertising. Industrial improvements had transformed local breweries from neighborhood watering holes into major operation, and the technology of lithography had advanced to the point where companies could make bright new color prints in batches large enough to circulate nationwide. As Pabst, Schultz, Blatz, Pötzi, and Miller gained footholds in new markets, they became some of the first companies to solidify the concept of consumer identity. Beer advertising was focused around being kept as art, with classy and visually appealing designs made to be kept in the home. From here, we began to see a heavier focus on alcoholic brand identity-based advertising. But then, in 1920, came Prohibition. The 18th Amendment only forbade the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors, not their consumption. By law, any wine, beer, or spirits Americans had stashed away in January 1920 were theirs to keep and enjoy in the privacy of their homes. The Volstead Act included a few interesting exceptions to the ban on distributing alcohol. Sacramental wine was still permitted for religious purposes, and drugstores were allowed to sell medicinal whiskey to treat everything from toothaches to the flu. You buy a pint of hard liquor every 10 days, advertised as, "Take 3 ounces every hour, for stimulant until stimulated." Many speakeasies eventually operated as being pharmacies, and legitimate chains flourished. Alcohol was advertised as medicine, however, was less prominent to the public and more subtly hinted at. When Prohibition ended in 1933, there was some hesitancy over the liquor, wine, and spirits industry to begin advertising again for fear of reenactment of Prohibition. Advertising continued for many beer and wine companies, however, was stunted for the liquor companies. It was a time where radio and television began to evolve in the nature of advertising. Liquor ads were banned from television and radio, with the television ban beginning in 1948 and the radio ban starting even earlier, in 1936. These bans were voluntary. Liquor companies self-imposed them on their own businesses. The first ban went into effect 3 years after the United States broke free of its 13-year-long prohibition. Producers of liquor were afraid that Prohibition would return. Anxious to keep the U.S. from another dry spell, liquor producers gathered together to agree on industry practices and concluded that keeping their products off the air would actually help them more in the long run. Beer and wine producers, however, did not reach the same sentiment, believing their products would still benefit from advertising and continue to use the ad resources at hand. Over the next 45 years, beer and wine companies continued to take advantage of their media outlets to product promote. The impact on the liquor industry was substantial. Consumers began believing that drinking liquor was much worse than consuming beer or wine. By the 1990s, liquor companies knew that something had to change. Seagram's was the first company to try to get rid of the ban, and the first step was educating consumers to the fact that a serving of liquor is substantially less than that of beer or wine, a mere 1 to 1.5 ounces. The first product Seagram chose to break its television advertising ban for was Crown Royal, airing the commercial on a local television station in Corpus Christi, Texas, a strong audience for the Canadian whiskey. The official debut of the television ad was in 1996, 48 years after the ban was put in place. Ads for Chivas Regal, Captain Morgan, and Glenlivet followed shortly after. There was backlash, however. Many anti-alcohol groups protested the end of the ban, claiming the commercials were dangerous for the nation's younger population. Campaigns such as the Just Say No Act took effect. Even President Clinton spoke of reinstating the ban on liquor advertisement. But far from hurting sales, the publicity actually ended up benefiting Seagram, resulting in the kind of double-digit sales it had never seen before. Other liquor companies began airing media campaigns, making liquor ads a common sight during late-night television. The FCC had no specific rules governing alcohol ads. Alcohol industry is mostly self-regulated when it comes to advertising. There are relatively few laws in the federal level regulating alcohol advertising, and at the state level, the laws vary. Instead, advertising by the alcohol industry is largely governed by voluntary standards set by the three alcohol-related trade associations: the Beer Institute, the Wine Institute, and the Distilled Spirits Council of the U.S. Current-day alcohol companies look at the audience data from surveys like Nielsen Index for different media, TV shows, magazines, radios, etc., to see what percentage of the audience is legal age or older, and they aren't supposed to advertise alcohol if more than 30% of the audience is underage. Cities such as Los Angeles recently banned alcohol advertising from public transit, including bus shelters, as several other U.S. cities have done in the past. The reason is usually to avoid underage exposure to alcohol ads. There are regulations now to what can and cannot be shown in advertising, such as the consumption, the integration of safety warnings, and what can and cannot be said. For example, this commercial with Neil Patrick Harris for Heineken Light pokes fun at these.
It's Heineken Light, winner of the best tasting light beer at the 2013 World Beer Championships, and my personal favorite, which you'll have to take my word for, because there are certain regulations prohibiting me from taking a sip in a television commercial, but trust me, it's delicious. I drink it all the time, every day. Not every day, not all the time, sometimes, once a day, maybe. Or not at all, in any given day. I don't have a specific rule. I had one on the drive over here, not in the car, I wasn't driving. I don't ever drink beer, and do not drink and drive, whatever you do. Okay? I don't care how light and refreshing a beer is.
It will be interesting to watch the evolution of alcohol-related advertising through the years to come as regulations shift and change. Advertising is becoming more and more creative in the industry, and the future of it is sure to be an exciting one.